trying to improve your body composition, trying to improve your fat adaptation, your fat burn, and more. So here's what I look at when we do metabolism testing, exercise tests, when we do a resting test. We get a big, huge report from the company Pinoy. We're looking at metabolic testing, analyze what fuel you are using. This isn't a mathematical equation. We don't figure out your 5 training zones and your metabolic health based on a percentage of your VO2 max. We're not measuring lactate, though I could. I'm curious of measuring lactate in a test, and maybe someday I will do that, but it's not telling us what is your fat to carbohydrate burn. We can look at your VO2 max, but I guarantee you that's your VO2 peak the first few times, because most people get very uncomfortable at that higher heart rate when you're going to your maximum. The mask and breathing, it's not comfortable. So I rather look at it as your VO2 peak, figure out where your fat burning is, your peak fat burning, what that zone 2 is going to be for you, that fat max. Look at your resting metabolism. At rest, laying there for 10 minutes, you should be burning fat. But I have identified people that are metabolically unhealthy because at 10-minute rest, they're burning carbohydrates. So we really want to identify, are you prone to type 2 diabetes? Is your insulin level high, but also at rest and during various intensities when we do the exercise test? It's called an active metabolism test. We're looking at how are you using fuel at various intensities. So it's important to get this done. The breath test, resting test, as I said, is going to look at how many calories you're burning, your RMR, resting metabolic rate. We're going to look at your breathing. How do you breathe? Are you slow and shallow? Are you hyperventilating? Do we need to do more breath work to strengthen your lungs, or maybe make sure you're getting enough oxygen in per breath? And looking at heart rate variability, are you in sympathetic dominance versus parasympathetic, and having a resilient heart rate variability result on our heart marker here that we do in the report of the resting metabolism test. Okay, so I've done a bunch of videos on this. I won't go too deep dive into these slides, but breathing analysis, RER, RMR. RER is your respiratory exchange ratio. That's going to look at your fat to carb burn, and your resting metabolic rates. How many calories do you need at rest? And then we figure out additional calories you burn throughout the day from the thermic effect of food, and then just movement, as TDEE it's called. So we get an overview of how well your heart, lungs, cells, blood circulation, metabolism work separately, but together, because they all work together. Obviously, your heart and your lungs, your cells, they all work together as an orchestra. So the breathing analysis that we do with Pinoy is measuring and analyzing the gases that you're breathing, oxygen and carbon dioxide. So this is more of a breath analysis. It shouldn't be intimidated as a VO2 max test. I would say we're looking at how your metabolism is. How do you burn fuel at rest and during various intensities, as well as what fuel do you use? So that's important. Okay, so how can it help you? We can look at your chronological age versus biological age based on your VO2 peak in the test, their metabolic rate, and your fat burn efficiency. So we can identify that with the exercise test and the resting test. Now, the cardiovascular fitness score is something we look at to measure your heart, your blood vessels, and look at your cardiovascular fitness from your VO2 peak. That's the amount of oxygen your body can absorb. And then there's another word, your O2 pulse. That's the number or the amount of oxygen your cardiovascular delivers per heartbeat. So O2 pulse, you think oxygen is O2, and your pulse would be your pulse, your heart rate, heartbeat, beats per minute. So a higher VO2 peak combined with a constant steady increase in O2 pulse as exercise increases gives you a cardiovascular score. So this is an example of all these different reports we get when we do the metabolism test. The page looks like this. You'll get a score based on your gender, age, height, weight, and looking at, is this your area of opportunity? And then if it is, we look at the whole picture. We don't just treat lab results as we do here. We don't just look at one marker. We look at the whole picture, and we're putting the missing pieces of the puzzle together. So what do we need to change with your exercise? What do we need to adjust with your nutrition and lifestyle habits? So I'm just whipping through this real quick because I want to get to fat adaptation process. So optimal cardiovascular results, what is a good result? Optimal result, and what is a poor, which I hate that word, it's so negative. So area of opportunity would be poor. That just shows me this is what you're not doing enough of. Here's maybe what's holding you back from being your best self. And then with the VO2 peak, your metabolic rate, your fat carb burn at rest, and then we measure fat carb burn during exercise activity levels that change the intensity as you go. And we're analyzing your breathing. So from that, we can identify your 5 training zones. How many calories do you need at rest? And then how many calories you're burning during exercise sessions? What are the macros? So if you are fat to carb burner, is your higher percentage of fat burners. Some people are really big carb burners. So we're more risk of insulin resistance, or maybe we see that when we do your labs, and then we need to adjust your macros, adjust those carbs and fat. The protein, I think everyone should stay somewhat similar, and adjust the carbs and protein, or carbs and fat based on the individual. We can identify what is your zone 2, your peak fat burning, that will improve your mitochondrial function, your cellular fitness, and your fat burn. And then breathing work, if you want to optimize your cognitive function, as we were speaking about brain health, we want to look at breath work too. So that's what we're looking at, aerobic health markers, another example, and more. So let's get to fuel. So when we're doing a test, we're measuring your fueling. So we're not guessing. A lot of people are using your 5 training zones based on, say, 60 to 70% for VO2 max, 70 to 80%, 80 to 90, 90 to 100. That's not what we're doing. We're looking at fuel sources actually measured when you, just you, are exercising, as well as the rest. But we're looking at your concentrations of oxygen and carbon dioxide in the breath. The metabolic analyzer can calculate RER, respiratory exchange ratio, 0.70. 0.70 is fat. 1.0 RER is carbohydrates. 0.85 is 50-50. So what we are doing is looking at your test, different stages of your exercise. We're increasing that intensity, whatever protocol we do, and how much I increase it every minute or every 2 minutes or is dependent on your fitness level. So we do a little pre-test test, see what the protocol is going to be for you and adjust it. So Pinoe testing can help identify what your program is based on metabolic flexibility, how efficient you are at burning fat or not, optimize your training programs, and we can tailor your nutrition. And if we need to supplement, where is we are lacking to support performance in life and sports, as well as your metabolic health. So we're looking at your peak fat burning. AT is kind of old news. We're not saying aerobic and anaerobic. So this is really outdated nowadays, is 2024. You're not with oxygen or without oxygen. Everything we learned is wrong. Do you realize that? It just always changes. So we don't say aerobic or anaerobic. We're looking at I'm burning more fat. I'm oxidizing more fat. So oxidative phosphorylation. And then the fuel sources changes. Lactate's always being used as a fuel. It just increases as intensity goes up. So we want to change our words. And in the past, we use MAF, max aerobic function. Phil Maffetone taught us the 180 minus your age is your max aerobic function heart rate. So you want to stay there for your zone 2. And other people, if you can get a test to identify where you are right now, retest every 2-3 months, because that zone 2 will change as you improve your fat burning. So we're looking at fuel switching, 5 different fuel sources. Exercise drives the fuel switch, not anything else. So Daniel Krumbeck taught me these pointers here. Each person switches their sources of different rates based on their systems, provide energy at each intensity level, will be more efficient at developing energy, ATP, in their zone 2 than others with a poor base. So that's why we want to really look at your zone 2 and figure out how to train. And that's going to be dependent on male versus female, how much time we spend in that zone 2, if your zone 2 is really lower than it should be, and if you're training for a race. And you'll hear Dr. Stacy Sims say women don't need zone 2 as much as men. Yes, but what if you're training for an event? That training schedule for endurance event will look different for women that are racing versus other women that are not doing endurance events. And then I would even have women do less zone 2 versus men, but it also depends on your Pinoy metabolism test. If you're really not burning fat at all, we're going to spend a lot more time there. So again, we want to personalize it, not say men versus women, everyone do it this way, but let's look at you, a unique individual. Okay, so if you don't have a good base, you're going to switch earlier to another fuel source and able to supply the required intensity. So this is what Daniel talks about in our interviews. We've done 2 interviews, so check the YouTube channel. This is why zones using science are extremely important. You have to see when your client, this is my notes, when your client, you, the patient, the athlete, the client, is switching their fuel system. And when you're able to accurately define your zones and zones with limitations or modalities, we're more specific. So I should edit this. This looks horrible, but in other words, zones are different than running zones, and limitations with those zones will be different as well. So it's really important that you do not test if you want accurate cycling zones. So basically, I need to delete all this and put a summary, but your running zones are different than your cycling zones. And the example here, if somebody has a really poor zone 2, they don't have a big base, they have not been doing a lot of training in that zone 2. They've been doing most of their training in zone 3. So they're not going to have the benefits of the mitochondrial density changes, and they won't be efficient at burning fat. So we need to look at what training zones they need to be in, say for the next 3 months, and we'll retest so we can see improvements. Okay, so fuel usage. So understanding your zones, remember, based on fat and carbs used during exercise for optimal nutrition. Different training intensity sports require varying amounts of fuel sources. By knowing your fuel usage patterns, you can drastically plan your nutrition, ensuring the right macros your body needs for the energy demand. Okay, so we identify your zone 2. That's going to be the VT1, that point where your carbohydrate goes up, metabolic crossover point. You start to see fat usage go down. The bottom of your zone 2 is your peak fat burning. So we're going to look at where is that peak fat burning? Where is that crossover point? So remember the RER is respiratory exchange ratio. So you can look over that. Push pause if you want to read it. So we look at this RER, VCO2 to VO2, and that's going to be a big part of what we're looking at in exercise. Where are you using fats? Where are you using carbohydrates? So fats, fatty acids, triglycerides are the primary fuel source for the long sustained distance, right? Carbohydrates are going to be used when you need to get quick fuel. You need higher intensities, you're going faster, you need to metabolize more fuel. So glucose and glycogen are metabolized through glycolysis to produce pyruvate, which can enter the Krebs cycle. And oxidase phosphorylation pathways in aerobic metabolism generates ATP, and glycolysis molecule of glucose can produce a net of 2 ATP molecules versus this says fatty acids, large amount of ATP compared to glucose yielding 129 ATP molecule per 16 carbon fatty acid. So fat versus carbohydrates, obviously a big difference of fuel source. Now, as we get higher intensities, I'll do a separate podcast on lactate, and Dr. Ben Bickman did an amazing webinar on their podcast channel. He has these classes that they share on lactate and the new research on it, and lactate is a fuel source, and it's super fascinating. So ask me for that link. So we'll go into this another time. When we get up to zone 5, that's why I think you really need to work on creatine supplementation as well as the research for brain health. But creatine phosphate is a rapid energy reserve in muscle cells. Short bursts of high intensity activity, sprinting and weightlifting, that's your zone 5 fuel source. So women, if you listen to the research on creatine, for women is different than men. We actually need to supplement creatine more than men. is we don't store as much as they do. So creatine phosphate stores high energy phosphate bonds that can be rapidly transferred to ADP to generate ATP. And ATP is your money, your currency of energy. So quick muscle contraction. So creatine phosphate metabolism does not directly generate ATP, but acts as a buffer to maintain ATP levels during rapid energy demands. Creatine phosphate does not contribute to oxidative stress or metabolic waste. Even better. It serves as a rapid energy reserve and helps maintain ATP levels during short bursts of high intensity activity. So short burst training is the 10 to 30 seconds. This is what Stacy Sims talks a lot about for women to do. You'll hear different interviews, even for runners. What's the podcast I did on running, how to reverse engineering endurance running is to start with sprint. So you're really working on your form and doing 30 seconds sprinting and then walk, jog. Women, we also want to look, if you are pre-menopause, that you're looking at your training schedule matches your hormone cycle. So 3 years ago, I made a whole menstrual cycle chart and it's on my Training Peak. So when I train clients, I can ask them when their menstrual cycle is, and then we can figure out when the ovulation is, and luteal phase. The 4th week will be your recovery deload week. So we go half the volume and keep the intensity. Okay, so metabolism testing, obviously I'm passionate about, gives you a lot of information. So it's super affordable. I think $200-300 to get a program that's going to be catered to you and then see your improvements. Don't be intimidated by a VO2 max test, because I don't really care how high you go. I care about where you burn the peak fuel, fat, zone 2, because then we can see how you should train. And sprint interval training, you go hard as you can. So I'm looking at what your zone 2 is and zone 1 even. All right, so I'm not going to go into fasted. I think we're a lot of information there. We've gone over about women and men, 12 hours, how to eat beforehand. We can talk about females. There's a lot of information of fasted exercise. You can take some 20 grams of essential amino acids or a little bit MCT oil. What I've read is 20 grams of carbohydrates pre-workout. So even 10 grams, I think I've been doing Laird's coffee creamer, has some coconut sugar in it. I don't want to eat a meal before I work out. I go at 5 a.m, but if I'm going to do a workout that's going to bring my heart rate up into glycogen burning, as when I do my hour bike ride with Hills, I will try to add something into my coffee as the Laird's creamer, or I just some creatine in my water. And then my coffee has collagen, is what I was trying to say, collagen and heavy cream. Now, women, we can talk a lot another time too. You can ask me about kisspeptin hormone. This is a big thing why we don't want to do too much fasted exercise, especially if you're working out harder, because this is the hormone that gets disrupted that if it causes domino effect in our hormones. So fasting, it wasn't my point of this call, but talking about fueling. So you can ask me more on that. We've gone into that. So let's skip over to that whole fasted things, another seminar. So here's when I want to go. Train low, race high. So if you are training endurance, we know that zone 2 is going to be more, again, we don't say aerobic versus anaerobic anymore, as oxidative glycolysis, and then glycogen is being burned higher intensity than the phosphagen system. So we're not saying with oxygen or without oxygen. New words, always changing. Now, fuel sources we're using, again, we want to know how you should train. So good infographics if you like to see pictures. Fatty acids and glucose in more that higher zone 2, that's more your zone 3. And then glucose, zone 4, and zone 5 creatine phosphagen. Okay, so we want to identify your crossover point, right? So where are you right now in your fitness level burning the most fat? What intensity is at what speed? So we're not going to even write your training schedule out based on percentage or what speed that is. I don't know what speed you are at. Say your peak fat burning is 135 heart rate. So maybe your zone 2 is 125 to 135. I don't know what your speed is at that. We want, if you look at Phil Maffetone wrote 30 years ago, max aerobics function, and then you do a monthly test, say, I want to see at 140 heart rate, what is my pace? Every month, do a 3-mile test and look at what your 3-mile pace is, pace per each mile, what speed you are. All right, so endurance athlete, nutritional ketosis, low carb, this is the whole conversation. How many carbs do you need? Your protein, we know we want to start with. I love perfect aminos or Keon aminos, getting that good quality protein that we can get the amino acids. So getting whole eggs, meat, poultry, fish, limiting your dependence on whey, soy, or nuts, and then look at branched chain amino acids aren't helping us. So we want to look at muscle protein synthesis, and we want to look at what fat and carbs you need. We're going to adjust per person. So how do you become fat adapted? Nutrition and exercise. It takes time for the body to use fat as a fuel source. So if you're new to endurance training and you're new to zone 2 training, once we identified what even zone 2 is for you, because I guarantee you're training in zone 3, and what type of workout should you be doing? More strength? Should you be doing more intervals? Should you be doing more zone 1 training? Where are you and what is your stress level like? If you're already stressed out and just have way too much on your plate, your hormones, HPA axis, your thyroid, everything's disrupted, we want to really dial down everything. So fat adaptation is being where you're burning fat and you don't need to burn fat. I can't talk anymore. You're able to use fat at higher intensities the more you train. So the whole meaning of fat adaptation is where you're able to training low, where you don't have a lot of carbs available. You don't need them. You're burning, say there's 40,000 calories of stored fat and you have 20,000 stored carbs. You're going to want to depend on those fat calories for fuel source if you're training low in that zone 1 and 2. So train low entails dietary strategies that deliberately withhold carbohydrates before, during, and after careful selected training sessions, zone 1 and 2. If you're going higher heart rates, you do need some carbohydrates in your diet. But to eat a lot of carbohydrates, more than 20 grams, when you're burning high percentage of fat, you don't need to add those carbohydrates in. And the carbohydrates, we'll talk about what source are going to be when you need it, are coming from nature. So Bullock and Finney really changed a lot for me. 2015, their book earlier, I don't know when it came out, The Art and Science of Low Carb Performance. There's also Keto Gains, Low Carb Performance, Jim Road. I don't know all the pictures, but there's great information from Keto Gains, from Zach Bitter, S Fuels, How to Train Low and Race High. So we can go into this next time and look at my previous videos, what all this means for you. Carb, fat, fuel for ultra endurance, what it looks like. So we want to look at, focus is how to get there. Where are you now? This is September, almost October. The fall season, if it's your off season, is when you want to work on this. So we have Endure IQ, how to become fat adapted for an endurance athlete. Dan Plews creates this phase to be fat adaptation 4-phase program to help you. And I would tweak it for women and where they are in their hormone cycle or if they're postmenopause. So this is more for men, and then women we'll talk about. So baseline is where you are now. So if you're not training for any races, it's a good time to work on this. Phase 1, baseline. Monitor what you're eating. This is working with the coach as myself. We're doing a glucose monitor test, CGM, continuous glucose monitor. We're looking at heart rate variability. I like people to use an app that tells us not just your HRV with a chest strap, but your LF to HF score. So we're just collecting data. I'm observing. Let's see how you feel. How's your energy? Let's look at your hormones. Let's look at a GI test. Let's look at the Dutch test and look at food sensitivities. So while we're collecting that data, we're waiting for your lab test results. We're working on phase 2, whole foods. Let's just look at what you're eating and clean up your diet. Let's eat real food, nutrient-dense foods. Get rid of the vegetable seed oils, get rid of the packaged foods. Let's figure out when you're traveling or eating out, what foods are best for you. We work on that. And then phase 3, we didn't just get here to start cold keto. We did a phase 1, phase 2, and we worked to phase 3. So we didn't go cold turkey. There's a reason. So 3 weeks for men, we're going to go a little more fat, keeping our protein from animal meat, ideally, or animal proteins, the best nutrient dense source. Gets a little complicated for a vegan, but we can do it. 50 grams of carbs. We're just staying there, but your exercise is going to change. So that's why we need to do this off season. Nuts and seeds are here, non-starchy vegetables, but if you have gut issues, we might not do the nuts and seeds. Females, if you're having your menstrual cycle, we want to do this during your days 7 to 14. So 2 weeks here, like after your period ends to before ovulation. And your IQs, this is Dan Plu's program, phase 1 summary. Baseline. Maintain what you're doing. Just learn about your habits, internal physiology, baseline values. We monitor your glucose, food diary, heart rate variability. I use nutritional therapy intake forms as I'm a practitioner, nutritional therapy practitioner. And this is where I will order your labs as an FDN practitioner. We do functional lab testing and assessment. But while we're waiting for those labs to get delivered to you, you take the test, send it back to the lab, then I get the results and I put all this information together. We're establishing what your normal ranges are, what habits, start to understand how food makes you feel. When we're ready, we move to stage 2. So we're focusing again, nutrient dense, real whole foods. Avoiding those processed foods, the seed oils that are inflammatory, learning about what to eat, keeping it simple. Learning how real food tastes, how you're eating, mindful habits, chewing your food, not inhaling it. A lot of people actually just eat too fast is part of the problem. Not eating while doing 10 things at once. But I swear, just stop, pause, and take 3 breaths in, exhaling out slower, and really reset before you start eating. And just pay attention how you eat. People's eating habits are so bad. Really an area of opportunity to start with that. And then we work on eating foods off a green list. That's Professor Noakes has a sheet, the Banting diet, the green food list, orange food list that we can use. And then red food list, obviously, is do not eat. So we continue learning from your heart rate variability and glucose. Now, if your heart rate variability drops, as there's too much stress, your heart rate variability lowers. That means if your carbs, you went too fast lowering those carbohydrates, or high intensity loads are increased, or your reactive foods, you're having foods that you're reactive, sensitive to. Your heart rate variability tells us a lot. Now, if we have increase in glucose because you're using a CGM, and I just got it hold, I'm not on my phone right here, but there's a new company, Abbott, I think is a CGM maker. It's only $50 to get a CGM for 14 days. Amazing. That's what the doctor charges. So you can order over the counter. So let me know if you want to know how much CGM, because Nutrisense and Levels come with this membership thing and the app and all that. And it's really expensive. It's $150 a time. So I'm excited that more people can afford a CGM. Increasing glucose tells us a lot. If we have too much cortisol, because remember, stress raises cortisol, raises glucose. So we can see some changes if we make 2 fasted changes. So this is where you are for 2 weeks. All right, where'd my little cursor go? Then we're ready to go cold keto. This is about 3 weeks long. This is where we're measuring your ketones. I use Keto Mojo. You can keep using your glucose monitor, but the ketones we're looking at 0.5 is nutritional ketosis. Moderate ketone zone might be around 2. So we're looking at this Keto Mojo. We're not trying to get ketoacidosis, by the way, if you don't know, is at 10. Fasting a long time, people might get higher ketones, but post-exercise, you might see a little more of a 3. So using Keto Mojo, and you ask me for a discount code on that. So let me know if you don't have a Keto Mojo, or keep just monitoring everything. You don't know how to manage if you're not measuring. So I hate the word keto, as you probably know by now, but we're looking at nutrient-dense foods. We're eating fat and protein. Cold keto is called the name from Endure IQ, calls this phase 2 weeks. We're going lower. So we're going to keep your carbohydrates around 50 grams net carbs without the fiber. So staying here 2 to 3 weeks. As we go through here, we're finding what's called, Dan calls your sweet spot, 50 up to 130 grams. You're going to match your fueling. So if you're doing a lot more higher intensity, you'll need to add more carbohydrates. Some people can go 200, 300 grams a day. It depends on your metabolism and if you're metabolically healthy. You're going higher fat and protein. So getting that grass-fed meat, getting fish, wild-caught fish. We're tracking everything. We want to know how you are feeling. This is really big. Dan Plews, this is from his program I did. Here's what he does. Remember, he's age group champion of Ironman now twice. Morning fat coffee. He has MCT oil, collagen in his coffee. You can put some grass-fed butter. Dr. Elizabeth Bright talks about butter for women to get a little more fat throughout your day, not eating a ton of fat at once. You're getting little meals. Now, Dan has a post-workout meal. So pre-workout, he has his fatty coffee. Post-workout, he's getting his protein in and fat. So you see eggs and sardines. So great, healthy fats and protein there. Broccoli is going to have some of the carbs and coconut oil for his fats, as well as the fatty fish. Now, coffee and cream, he had another, so he must work out early. He has a bar as a snack if he's working out 2 days. Almonds, I'm actually trying to limit anything with almond because I think it's easy to get too many nuts. And if you want me to do another, I need to just do one video on phytates and lectins and oxalates because they're the anti-nutrients. So if you are low in magnesium, zinc, iron, listen to my podcast on phytates. Now, salmon, olive oil, avocado, asparagus, another great meal. People think it's so complicated to eat this way. It's a meat or a fish. And if you want a vegetable, sometimes I don't have vegetables, but steak, simple salad, and dark chocolate. I love having some dark chocolate. Get some that's 80%. Just have one square. Don't eat the whole bar. Salmon, simple meal. Salmon and asparagus with some avocado. Easy. But look at this day. It's average 50 grams total carbs a day. So it doesn't mean you're not eating carbohydrates. It's you're focused on getting your protein goals. We adjust your fat to feel full and satiated. And this is a couple years old now. I'm making sure people get their protein in, 1 gram of protein per ideal body weight. And then we adjust the fat. Now, this is cold keto that you're adding more fat in. You're just trying to get your body with the goal to be more fat adapted, right? So cold keto phase, to get your body to be a fat burner, we want to track your heart rate variability. You'll see it go down as you start to transition to be depending on more fat and ketones. Your glucose on your CGM may increase because higher cortisol as the body increases ketones might be side effect with stress and transition, I think is what this means. And remember, higher cortisol, as I say, stress response is a blood sugar response. High cortisol will activate more glucose. Higher intensity workouts during cold keto keeps the body adapting. Normal to have lower performance. So we're going to do shorter workouts. Short sprint intervals. Sleep, you might find yourself struggling to sleep if you went from a high carb to low carb. So that's why we want these slow transitions, because it can be too much stress on your body. So carb timing at night, you might need little 10 grams. That might be 20 grams of the half a cup of berries. So maybe just eat a few frozen berries, blueberries or strawberries. Help with sleep. You can make sure you have some sodium, magnesium in your water, Relight or LMNT. And so you can look at that. But keto flu, people used to always talk about bodies low in carbs struggling in transition. So adding more sodium, potassium, magnesium. That's what Element is. And Keto Chow has a new company, Salty. So there's lots of options these days. So finding your sweet spot, phase 4. Now you went low carb for 2-3 weeks. Now we're bringing you back up. And this is where we'll bring the exercise intensity back up, adjusting those macros. Okay, so we're monitoring how you feel, matching your nutrition, and training to maximize your fat oxidation. So changing your training in each phase to match your nutrition. So now we might be going 50, 75, 100 grams, figure out, going by how do you feel? How's your workout performance? How's your heart rate variability? How's your resting heart rate? How's your stress level? So more low carb, high fat goes 100 to 130 up to 200 grams, just adjust. So again, we have phase 1, baseline. Phase 2, whole foods. Phase 3, cold keto. Phase 4 is your sweet spot. So we're matching now your workouts. What do we do? Phase 1, we're just keeping it normal. I'm just watching, observing, learning about you. Phase 2, keeping the routine, but now we're going to drop your volume down a little bit of your workouts if you're an endurance athlete. Now we're going cold keto phase, dropping those carbs. We're going to reduce your training load more, 20%. And we're going to keep some short intensity intervals in there. Then phase 4, gradually increase training back up to 2-3 weeks, returning to your normal program. So that's why you want to do this off season. So maybe we're doing week 1 is you've got baseline. You're doing whole foods for 2 weeks. Maybe that's 3 weeks. And then we've got 6 weeks cold keto. So or 3 weeks. So that's 6 weeks total in the sweet spot. So this is like 2 months. What carbohydrates do you use? Now, most people that are metabolically unhealthy, they're not exercising, they're not as active as you. You can probably tolerate more carbohydrates. So maybe you're looking at root vegetables, sweet potatoes, really looking at what works, berries, organic, looking at what's in season. We want to track your heart rate variability. If it's dropping's a negative. Carbohydrates might be too low or your training intensity is too high. If your glucose is increasing, your carbs are too high, or you might have some underlying inflammation. Remember, cortisol can raise that glucose, or too high intensity, or you're not recovering enough. So this is where we need to track and learn about you using Training Peaks, or I use Practice Better. Some days someone will make one program that can have everything in one spot. High intensity performance decreasing. So if your performance level after 6 weeks is feeling flat, you might need to add in more carbohydrates before your workout and maybe even during if it's a longer workout. But doesn't mean a ton. Remember, 20 grams is what's often suggested. You can look at the food list, orange foods at dinner if you're doing a morning workout. So if I'm going to do a hard morning workout that's going to be burning some more glycogen than fat, maybe that's where you add in your evening meal, a little more starchy potatoes or something. So that's called strategic carb timing. When we know we're going zone 3, zone 4, zone 5 workouts, we need a backup fuel source. Standard American diet, the standard diet, SAD diet, 50, 60 plus % carbs, or make it a heavy carb diet. We're just talking about 20 to 30 carbs. We're not saying 0 carbs. but your carbohydrates are in and around your workouts if you are not doing a zone 1-2 workout. That's where we want to give yourself metabolism test, or maybe you need to come to Del Mar, where I do testing at a little studio by the beach in North San Diego, and we do your test. Now, that's why I changed the name of the podcast to just my own name. Keep it simple. But low carb doesn't mean zero carb, and it doesn't mean carbs are evil. Really important to go over this. Strategic carb timing is what Peter Defty's talked a lot about what the role of Vespa is when you are now fat adapted, you're metabolically flexible, you can be burning fat as your main fuel source, but you're still able to switch to burn carbohydrates when you need it. When I'm going for a bike ride today, example, my ride today, I did some pieces because I was doing a 3-hour ride instead of longer, and I was by myself, and I was trying to go a little harder on hills, get my heart rate up, and then bring it back down when you're going downhill, or just kind of built in the course that would be an easier section, so your heart rate drops. I am metabolically flexible that I can shift back to be burning fat and recover faster. My heart rate will drop really fast the more I do this. So it depends what your workout is, what the purpose of the workout, and if you have developed already a very strong foundation in your zone 1 and zone 2 where you're burning a lot of fat. And we don't need to do fuel. So again, in my workout this morning, I was doing some pieces that I was burning more carbohydrates, coming back to where I'm burning a lot of fat. I had pre-workout coffee. I just had some butter in my coffee, heavy cream, and collagen, I think I might have put in there, but I put sea salt in there. I didn't really have anything to eat. I should have. I did have a ketone shot. I need to go grocery shopping. So I didn't have anything. That in my coffee. And then I had in my ride a Laird's bar that's 20 grams of carbohydrates. I take that bar and have it in 2 or 3 pieces. So maybe I'm getting 10 grams of carbohydrates and then another 10 grams. Gave me enough fuel. Because I was hungry. If I don't eat beforehand, I'm still getting calories in my coffee. So it's not a fasted workout. I can put Laird's creamer in there, as I said, that gets some carbohydrates with the coconut sugar as a sweetener and like pumpkin spice or the mocha. So to me, that's getting some fuel in there. So my body should not be stressed of not having any calories. I think it depends. And my workout was good. I felt strong and energetic, but I do get hungry during the ride when I don't have a big meal before workout. Because I go early, I'm not going to have a big meal. So it gets complicated. What time of the day are you working out? When was your last meal? We have to dive into all that to make it personalized. Okay, so not all carbs are evil for the athlete. If you are metabolically healthy, you're exercising, you can tolerate more carbohydrates than you hear about the people that don't exercise. So we have need for some carbohydrates for performance. All right, I'm not going to go into it, but looking at processed foods is what we're trying to avoid. Nature's carbs, getting rid of the vegetable oils, inflammatory foods, preservatives, processed foods, potential food allergens. Not having the cookies and the crackers, biscotti, scones, bagels, muffins. That's the stuff we want to avoid. Even trail mixes that are cooked in vegetable oils, right? So we want to make sure we're getting real food. That's what we're talking about. Vespa, I just got some samples to give out to my athlete event I'm hosting. Strategic carb timing. Listen to the interviews I've done with Peter Defty on what is Vespa. Once you are fat adapted, you're metabolically healthy, you can build that aerobic capacity to its potential, which I'd switch that word aerobic to fat burning athlete. You can tolerate some concentrated carbohydrates in your diet and fueling so you can get that performance punch as the carbs without the unintended consequences of a chronic high carb diet. The amount of and timing varies and is very highly individualized for athlete and for the sport you're doing. Athletes can tolerate some clean carbs, not carbs, it says strategically timed in their training and or competitions. This is from Peter. Now, this is what people ask. How can that person not have anything? Well, I know a lot of people that have carbs. They might not say that, but they're having a gel or they're having a bar or they're drinking it as Vitargo or UCAN or S Fuels in their workout. Now, S Fuels, good chart of nature's carbs. They talk about, berries and the vegetables, avocados. But again, it depends on your intensity, your duration, and hormones. Safe starches are cooked with minimal anti-nutrients. All plants have a mechanism that you'll hear more and more about if you haven't already, anti-nutrients that discourage your consumption by mammals. This is why a lot of people are carnivore and not plant-based because of what we're talking about, those anti-nutrients. So safe starches contain minimal to no anti-nutrients compared to other plants as grains, nuts, seeds, legumes, and nightshades. Safe starches include white rice, and which is interesting, brown rice is the hull around the rice. That is where the anti-nutrients are. So I always thought brown rice was healthier than white rice because it's brown, I think natural. But the white rice, that doesn't have the anti-nutrients. So cooked and cooled vegetables, sweet potatoes, yams, taro root, cassava, plantains. That's kind of what those potatoes or nightshades not work for everyone, but we want to look at which carbs are best for you. Okay, so there's other, what is 30 to 50 grams of carbs look like? I look at more 20 grams. Pumpkin season is here. Spaghetti squash, rutabaga. I stay away from corn because that's often inflammatory food if you can't do wheat as myself. So corn is not too good for me. I take a wheat gluten guardian digest co when I take corn. So we want to look at what are some good options for you. Now you can go back to the book Rob Wolf wrote a few years ago, Wired to Eat, finding what carbs work best for you. Testing, there's a food test to do in there. And that gives you good information. Carb cycling, there's carb cycling programs, 5 days on, 2 days off. And then there's train lower carbs and when you're around your race. So we'll talk about that next time. Training types, how to match your fueling and training to improve fat loss, health, and performance. Tracking, heart rate variability, as we said, resting heart rate, deep sleep, REM. These are all important things. And how to train for endurance sports that if you are the 80-20, there's different models you'll hear about. But again, we want to look at each person and based on your metabolism test, what that looks like for you, men and women, but also women. They say we don't need as much as men as the 80-20 split. And then looking at your training cycle with your hormones. What I really think is looking at your metabolism test, because just because you're a woman, we're not maybe say, oh, we only need 60% zone 2 or 50%. But if your zone 2 is non-existent because you've been training wrong, well, I'm going to change my opinion on that. So 80-20 polarized training, that means you're doing zone 1, zone 2 training, high intensity workouts, stimulate the high intensity adaptations 20% of the time. So you can look at S fuels, lots of information, training the female athlete. I went over that, some other shows. And Stacy Sims' recommendations are going to be different for sure. So let's dive into pre-race and we can go into all the mapping, how to match your fueling, and give more examples of that next time. So let me know your questions and we'll do a dive into a part 2. Thank you.